QWERTY, the mechanical reality, not the myth. TH is the most common two-letter combination in English. On the keyboard in front of you right now, T and H are not next to each other. That's not an accident. Christopher Latham Sholes built his typewriter in the 1870s around a real mechanical limitation. Each key was connected to a metal type bar that swung up to strike the ribbon and print a character on the page. If two bars swung at the same time, they collided mid-air and physically jammed together, and the typist had to stop and pry them apart by hand before continuing. So Sholes looked at which letter pairs appeared together most often in English, and physically separated them inside the machine. T went to one side, H went to the other, so the bars connected to them would never be swinging through the same space at the same moment. This wasn't a single clean decision made in an afternoon. Sholes iterated on the arrangement repeatedly through the early 1870s, adjusting it based on which combinations kept causing problems in testing. That problem stopped existing in 1961. IBM's Selectric typewriter replaced the swinging bars entirely with a single rotating type ball, one small sphere covered in every character, which rotated and tilted to the correct position before striking the ribbon once. There were no individual bars left to collide, nothing left to jam. QWERTY didn't change anyway. By 1961, the layout had already been the standard for 83 years. Retraining every working typist who had built an entire professional skill around finger memory was a far bigger cost than the mechanical problem IBM had just solved. The constraint disappeared. The decision built around the constraint stayed exactly as it was. The 1888 event that actually sealed QWERTY's fate. The standard explanation for why QWERTY won is that it was simply the first typewriter layout to exist. That's only half the story. In July 1888, a public typing competition was held in Cincinnati. Frank McGurran, a court stenographer, won decisively against an opponent using a different keyboard. McGurran had done something almost nobody else had at the time. He'd memorized the QWERTY layout completely and could type without looking down at the keys, a technique that didn't even have a common name yet. His opponent used Hunt and Peck on a different layout and lost by a wide margin. Newspapers reported it. Secretarial schools took notice. Within a few years, schools were specifically training students on QWERTY because that's what the winning method had used. Offices then hired people who already knew it. This is the actual mechanism behind QWERTY's dominance. Not better design, but one public demonstration that happened to favor it, amplified afterward by the institutions that trained the workforce. The slowdown myth, and who profited from inventing it. The most repeated claim about QWERTY is that it was deliberately designed to slow typists down to prevent jamming. That claim came from August Dvorak, published in 1943, and Dvorak held a patent on a competing keyboard he was actively trying to sell. His own promotional materials made the slowdown argument. Sholes' surviving patent paperwork from the 1870s shows no language about limiting human speed at all, only about reducing mechanical collisions between bars. The myth has now outlived the man who invented it by more than 80 years, and it's still the version most people repeat as established fact. It didn't come from a historian, it came from a sales pitch. The regional layouts almost nobody outside their country knows exist. There is no single QWERTY. Once you leave English-speaking countries, the keyboard changes shape entirely. AZERTY, France, Belgium. The top row swaps Q for A and W for Z, but the detail almost nobody outside France knows. Typing a number on an AZERTY keyboard requires holding Shift. The unshifted number keys produce accented characters instead, so every digit costs French typists an extra keystroke that English typists never pay. Even capital accented letters like E are awkward, often requiring a key combination rather than a single keystroke. In January 2016, France's Ministry of Culture began work on an official replacement specifically to fix this, and AFNOR, the French national standards body, published a new standard in 2019. The traditional AZERTY layout is still what most French keyboards use today. The fix exists. Adoption has been slow, for the same network effect reason QWERTY never got replaced either. QWERTZ, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Central and Eastern Europe. One swap from QWERTY, Z and Y trade places, because German uses Z far more often than English does, while Y is rare and mostly shows up in loanwords. Switzerland's version of this layout has to do something no other country's keyboard does. The same physical Swiss QWERTZ layout is shared across French, German, and Italian-speaking regions of the same country, meaning the key positions for accented characters had to compromise across 3 completely different languages on one piece of hardware. JCUKEN, Russia and former Soviet states. This is the layout most people outside Eastern Europe have never heard of, and it works completely differently from every variant above. AZERTY and QWERTZ just move Latin letters around. JCUKEN maps an entirely different alphabet, Cyrillic, with 33 letters instead of 26, onto the same physical key positions, designed around Russian letter frequency data the same way QWERTY was built around English. The most common Russian letters, O, A, and E among them, sit on or near the home row, under the fingers that move the least. Rarer letters go to the outer edges. The layout traces back further than most people assume. An earlier version called JCUKEN was standard in Russia before the 1917 spelling reform removed several letters from the alphabet entirely, which forced a redesign. The modern JCUKEN arrangement that followed has stayed the basis for nearly every Cyrillic keyboard since, including adapted versions for Ukrainian, Belarusian, Kazakh, Mongolian, and several other languages that switched their writing systems during the Soviet era. Most Russian keyboards solve a problem no Western keyboard has to deal with at all. They print both Latin and Cyrillic characters on the same physical keys. A and A share a key, S and S share a key. And users switch between the two character sets with a dedicated key combination, typically Alt plus Shift. One keyboard, two completely different alphabets switched on demand, with the physical key positions for Cyrillic following JCUKEN, regardless of what Latin letter happens to be printed on the same key. Dvorak's actual design logic, beyond it's faster. August Dvorak's layout is usually summarized as more efficient. The actual engineering behind it is more specific than that. All 5 vowels sit on the home row under the left hand, arranged so that common vowel-to-consonant patterns in English fall naturally under alternating hands as you type. Left hand, left hand, without you having to think about it. The 4 least used letters in English, Q, J, X, Z, went to the weakest finger positions on the layout, the bottom row, under the pinky fingers. Dvorak's logic was specific. Those letters are rare enough that even if the position is mechanically inefficient, it barely matters because you almost never press them. Here's the detail almost nobody knows about Dvorak. In the 1940s, he designed dedicated one-handed variants of his layout, separate left-hand-only and right-hand-only versions, built for people typing with the use of only one hand. The timing lines up with the period it was designed for, a wave of veterans returning from World War II with limb injuries. These one-handed layouts are still built into the accessibility settings of every major operating system today, decades after the standard two-handed Dvorak layout became a niche choice. Almost nobody who uses a computer knows this option exists in their own settings. The self-funded study that's still cited as proof. The single most quoted piece of evidence for Dvorak's superiority is a 1944 US Navy study showing that retraining typists on Dvorak paid for itself within 10 days through improved speed. That study was designed, conducted, and reported by Lieutenant Commander August Dvorak. While he held the patent on the keyboard the study was testing, the man being evaluated owned the product being evaluated. This is about as clean a conflict of interest as exists in the history of workplace research, and the study was never independently replicated under controlled conditions. In 1956, the U.S. General Services Administration ran its own independent comparison. Their conclusion: no significant speed difference between experienced typists on QWERTY versus Dvorak. A later academic review of the available evidence concluded any Dvorak advantage is real but small, nowhere near what Dvorak's own self-funded research had claimed. The 1944 study is still cited today, sometimes with the conflict of interest left out entirely, more than 80 years after independent researchers failed to replicate it. Colemak, the engineering decision nobody talks about. In 2006, a developer published under the name Shay Coleman released a layout called Colemak with a specific, narrow goal: get most of Dvorak's efficiency gains without breaking the one thing that makes switching unbearable. Dvorak changes 33 keys from QWERTY. Colemak changes 17, roughly half. The specific decision that matters most. Colemak deliberately left Z, X, C, and V exactly where QWERTY has them. Those 4 keys are the universal shortcuts for undo, cut, copy, and paste on every major operating system. Switch to Dvorak and all 4 shortcuts move to unfamiliar positions simultaneously, on top of every letter you already had to relearn. Switch to Colemak and your muscle memory for those 4 shortcuts stays completely intact while everything else improves around it. This single decision is most of the reason Colemak has a meaningfully larger active community today than Dvorak, despite being newer and far less marketed by comparison. It removes the specific friction point that makes most people abandon an alternative layout within their first week of trying it: People don't quit because the letters moved. They quit because they keep accidentally deleting their work instead of undoing it. Colemak also achieves a slightly higher home row keystroke percentage than Dvorak for standard English text, roughly 74% versus Dvorak's 70%, while changing about half as many keys to get there. It also spreads the workload more evenly across both hands than Dvorak does, reducing how often any single finger gets overloaded with high-frequency letters. It remains a niche choice in absolute numbers, but among the people who deliberately seek out an alternative to QWERTY today, Colemak is increasingly the one they land on, specifically because of this one compromise. Why nobody actually switches. An experienced QWERTY typist needs roughly 20 to 50 hours of focused, deliberate practice to get back to their old speed on Dvorak or Colemak, not casual use, dedicated relearning. During that window, typing speed drops by more than half. That's the specific reason most people who attempt the switch never finish. The cost shows up immediately, and the benefit only shows up weeks later if you stick with it that long. The deeper problem is structural, not personal. Every keyboard sold in a store is QWERTY. Every shared computer, every hotel terminal, every borrowed laptop defaults to QWERTY. A person who switches their personal layout still has to use QWERTY everywhere else, which means they're not replacing one layout with a better one. They're becoming fluent in two layouts simultaneously, and only one of them is theirs by choice. This is the network effect in its most stubborn form. The infrastructure that makes switching pointless isn't going anywhere, no matter how good the alternative is. The niche layouts built for extremely specific problems. Beyond the names most people have heard, there's a long tail of layouts built to solve one precise problem each. Workman, released in 2010, exists to fix a specific criticism of Colemak, that Colemak still overloads the index fingers with too many frequently used keys. Workman spreads that load more evenly across all 8 fingers used in typing. Maltron isn't really a different letter arrangement so much as a different keyboard shape with letters assigned to match it. It's paired with a split, curved physical keyboard, and the letter logic only makes sense on that exact hardware. You can't meaningfully use the Maltron arrangement on a flat standard keyboard. Bepo, released in 2003, is a from-scratch French layout, not a modification of AZERTY, but an entirely new design built from French letter frequency data the same way Dvorak was built from English data. It's officially recognized by French standards bodies and still remains a minority choice even among French typists who know about it. The technology quietly making the whole debate irrelevant. Smartphones have already loosened the QWERTY lock without most people noticing. Swipe typing and predictive text mean a phone is correcting for imprecise taps rather than requiring you to hit one exact key, which makes the underlying layout matter less than it did on a physical keyboard. Several mobile keyboard apps quietly offer Dvorak or Colemak as switchable options because the biggest barrier to switching on physical hardware, relabeling every key, simply doesn't exist on a touchscreen. Voice input goes further than any of this. It's the first mainstream input method in over a century that removes the keyboard layout question from the equation entirely rather than offering a different answer to it. QWERTY will likely remain the dominant physical keyboard layout for as long as physical keyboards remain the dominant way people type. The layout that never got replaced by something better may end up being replaced by not typing at all. Keyboards change shape across the world. The ports connecting them to everything else didn't get any more obvious until manufacturers started color coding them. Every USB port color explained is on screen right now.